how much an individual can actually achieve. And over the years, I've developed relationships with different offices, and I visit my own congresswoman, and they know you by name. They listen to what you have to say. One of our friends used to say, "There's no more beautiful music to the sound of a congressman's ears than the sound of his own constituent." Definitely, raise your voice and raise questions, raise concerns. You don't even have to always tell them what to do, but sometimes asking good questions can spark a flame. There are lots of ways to approach it, but yeah, that's basically to answer your question, kind of where things are right now. Overall, the U.S. government is happy that there are no major problems, that it doesn't have to send the Seventh Fleet to the Taiwan Strait, but at the same time, there's increasing recognition that Taiwan needs to get its house in order, and that there are some human rights problems going on. And read the recent State Department report, the brand new State Department report on human rights in Taiwan. There's some damning stuff in there. I mean, the U.S., if you compare the State Department human rights reports on Taiwan for the past 3 years, they're interesting. I think this one is one of the stronger ones. So people are noticing. People are paying attention. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. So I think my question is, I think throughout your talk you kind of described the historical relationship between U.S. and Taiwan, and in terms of the U.S. relation to Taiwan, it's often being ambiguous, right? And U.S. often intervenes in the China-Taiwan affairs when it is of U.S. or self-interest. I think we see that a lot.
Sure.
And also recently, right, we're seeing this promotion of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think it's also part of it, right? Like U.S. wanting to trade with Taiwan and also sell, military device to Taiwan when it is beneficial to the U.S. economically. And so when U.S. pushing for TPP, you also talked about that. It's also a pivot in Asia Pacific, and it creates a lot of military bases in Southeast Asian countries, which I think actually creates a lot of burdens to the people in Asia Pacific and creates a human rights.
We don't have any bases there now. I mean, we were kicked out of the Philippines. Now we're slowly creeping our way back in, but there are no other bases.
Right, but I think that's part of Obama's plan to reinsert itself into
maybe not in terms of military bases, but in terms of increased engagement, yes, and military relationships.
Right.
Sure.
Right. So I think, yeah, my question is...
Australia's gets troops.
Right. And also just thinking about economically trade of TPP, also I think gives the corporation way too much power in terms of its judicial power and its power to control, right, what it can sell, what it can open up. I mean, compared to a lot of this regional trade, I think TPP actually sets a higher bar. And so the question is, if it's always the Taiwan or smaller country have to kind of match U.S. interests and sort of also sell part of ourselves to engage in this so-called democratic negotiation to remain our democracy. I think that's a little bit, what is the word? Hypocritical, I think. I'm not talking about, talking about the mentioning U.S. political power per se. I think Taiwan is a really difficult situation because we are a small country, and I'm not against trade. I'm not against military intervention because we need that. But the question is, if U.S. always inserts such a high bar that to match its own economic interests, right? Then as a small country, we actually have to sacrifice a lot to join this so-called coalition. So this is a really difficult question, and I think maybe perhaps in your academic field, is there any talks around to restrict U.S. capitalist power or the power of corporation to actually maintain peace and justice, right, in Asia Pacific as a strategy, instead of always intervene in such a capitalistic and military violent way. I think I know in mainstream politics it's hard to talk about, but I'm wondering as in the scholarly field.
I would say not really, because the business community is one of the biggest supporters. So I think the fear is that if you tell the business community, hey, you're affecting the pig farmers, or hey, you can't sell bone-in, blah, 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 with the whole beef problem. I think there's a fear that if the business community feels that there are too many restrictions placed on it, it will just move to another country, and then Taiwan will be left out entirely. So I think it's about striking that balance, and by all means, the Taiwanese people should make their voices heard on the matter. That's why I think so many people were against black box negotiations, against opaque negotiations. And really, if you look at the way the beef crisis unfolded, part of the problem was that Ma negotiated these agreements without really understanding how strong local resentment would be, how strong local pressure would be. I don't think there was enough engagement with the populace. And so then, of course, when that was put through the legislative yuan, when that was implemented, you saw this huge backlash. And of course, the U.S. beef industry, which has, look at Max Baucus, now the ambassador to China, he was one of the strongest supporters on the Hill of Taiwan. There was a lot of betrayal felt in the United States, and more importantly, the sense that how can we trust Taiwan if we negotiate an agreement that took years in the making, and then Taiwan just says, no, we don't feel like implementing it. Because then what the U.S. policymakers took away from that is, we cannot trust Taiwan. That was incredibly damaging to Taiwan. And so, am I saying there should not be that dialogue? No, of course I'm not saying that. I think, in fact, this means there needs to be more dialogue so that the government can build a consensus around these issues. I mean, not that you can always achieve a complete consensus, that's impossible. In any economic trade, there are always going to be winners and losers. So what the Taiwanese government, in my opinion, needs to do is to, recognize in certain agreements there are going to be winners and losers. And then I'm sure Brown actually has talked about this as well, I think, in his support for Taiwan's accession to the TPP and other organizations. The Democrat needs to be responsible about how it helps those groups. If the pig farmers are going to be affected, do you engage in subsidization? Do you help them engage in job training? Do you find them alternative work? I think the point some people in Washington and in the academic community and elsewhere have made is that, there's never going to be an economic agreement that makes everyone happy, but you need to make sure that you are not violently disrupting the lives of the local people and leaving them out in the cold without any assistance. You have to make people, or you have to ensure that people can make a transition. I mean, there's really no discussion on whether the U.S. Business Association should hold back. I think the discussion is more about how can we engage in responsible negotiations? How can we ensure that there is transparent dialogue? And how can we ensure that we set the bar high to benefit as many players as possible? That's where I think we should move forward. Taiwan needs the support of the U.S. business community, but I agree with you that we need to make sure that it's not, we're not using slash and burn techniques. We have to make sure that we have as many winners as possible, that both sides benefit. So I think it's more about the negotiation strategy, government policies, making sure that people are protected as much as humanly possible. And I think that's true for any bilateral negotiations. Yes?
Yeah, because I was born in the 60s and went through the breakup between Taiwan and the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So I always had the impression that, because at the time it was Jimmy Carter, right? So, I think people in my age probably have the impression that Republican Party is more friendly to Taiwan and more strong stance against China than Democratic Party. Is it a truth or myth? And either way, does these two parties take different measures or approach toward this agenda?
There's a basis for that assumption, but I think currently there are a lot of strong supporters on both sides of the aisle The difference is that sometimes they support the relationship for different reasons. You still have a lot of old school Republicans who remember communism, who hate the Chinese government with the passion of 1,000 burning suns, and so they look at supporting Taiwan as a way of supporting democracy, of sticking it to China. So you've got that segment of the party. You've got another segment of the Republican Party that's big into trade, that thinks that, famous saying in the 1920s in America, the business of America is business. So that segment of the party that thinks that, look, Taiwan is a responsible economic partner. Taiwan is at the top of its game in terms of electronics, in terms of biomedical, and et cetera, nanotechnology now in emerging industries. So they think we need to be on board. We need to be working with Taiwan. There's a section of the Democratic Party that says, Taiwan is coming up with new green technologies. It's environmentally responsible. There are different people in different parties support Taiwan for different reasons. So I wouldn't say that the Republicans only support Taiwan because of reason X. The Democrats only support Taiwan because of reason Y. You have a lot of bilateral legislation. I found in my dealings with many representatives and senators on the Hill that there's actually an awful lot they do agree on in terms of Taiwan. That's why if you look at the signatures on various pieces of legislation, you do see a lot of bilateral agreement, you see a lot of bilateral cooperation. Previously, before Berman got booted from the House when he lost that election, he's a liberal Democrat from California. He was working very closely with Ilyana Rosleinen, who's like a moderate Democrat from Miami. They were like...
she's like a really hardcore Republican from Miami.
I think it depends on the issue. Like, she's very pro-gay rights. She's very... she supports a lot of moderate...
She's Republican and she's foreign policy. On foreign policy, she's a real hardliner.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about more broadly.
Yeah.
More broadly, I would classify her as a moderate. But it depends on the issue, sure. Some issues, yeah, like her stance on Cuba is much more conservative. But she is clearly far more conservative than Berman. But they were very close allies, worked together very well in Taiwan, and they would kind of make jokes about how they were best buds on the Foreign Affairs Committee when they were on different ends of the political spectrum from different parties. So, there are certain reasons why you tend to see a lot of Republican Taiwanese Americans or, so on and so forth, but I would say nowadays the relationship has changed, and I know a lot of leaders from both sides who adamantly support Taiwan, and not all for the same reasons. So there's diversity of thought, yes?
I think the better question is, why is Congress so supportive, and why is the administration right now not necessarily against it, but not very vocal about their support?
It's because of some of the leaders in the administration. I'm not going to name names, but there are...
Obama?
No, I'm actually not talking about Obama. Obama's not a Taiwan expert. Obama's not a foreign policy expert, period. That wasn't how he came to power. He's more of a domestic strategist. People didn't really vote for Obama based on his foreign policy experience because he didn't really have any. So Obama relies on a number of advisors, and in general, the advisors who are in his administration tend to be more China hands. And so, this is one of the biggest problems I see, that people in the administration or people in various positions, it's not that they're anti-Taiwan necessarily, it's just that they don't really understand Taiwan, and so the things they think they're doing to help Taiwan don't always actually benefit the bilateral relationship. But yeah, there are certainly certain people in the administration who think that Taiwan is a problem, and if it would just go away, then the world would be much easier to handle. And so there are certain individuals that have a hand in shaping administration policies that tend to favor policies that mitigate any bumps or decrease the number of bumps in the road. They try and encourage bilateral, meaning cross-strait negotiations. They try and placate China. But as I said, this really was the case in the first year and a half of the administration. It's moderated its position somewhat, but in the first year and a half, I think the administration, and I'm not critiquing it one way or another, I'm not saying whether I agree with this, but the administration honestly believed that if it met China in the middle, if it acceded to more of China's demands, then China would trust the United States, see the United States as a legitimate partner, and would be more willing to work with us bilaterally. And then after a year and a half, the administration realized, okay, well, that didn't quite go how we intended, so maybe we should change course. And again, I think there are some people in the administration who, they legitimately believe that, this is the right course of action. They are trying to be helpful. I don't think these people are, intentionally trying to subvert Taiwanese interests per se. Maybe some are, I don't know, but I think a lot of them have good intentions, but they're not Taiwan experts. And the people to whom they're speaking are clearly not Taiwan experts. And so I think that creates a lot of unintentional consequences in terms of the bilateral relationships. So
going forward, how can we change that?
The word for governance.
I think there are a number of steps. Obviously there's the local level, the state level, and the national level. Obviously, I think it's important that the Taiwanese American community continues to have events. Even small events like the Taiwan Cultural Fairs and the Taiwan Rocks, Hello Taiwan, the UN rally. These publicize the cause. A lot of non-Taiwanese Americans who understand and support Taiwan were brought into the cause by people who do understand. So in my case, I had parents who were big supporters of democracy and human rights, and I grew up, during the martial law era, and so I kind of got into it that way through a democracy and human rights perspective. But we can't expect people who are not Taiwanese to innately understand. So that's why it's important to create networks, to forge alliances. When I'm at events or I'm speaking, I always look at the audience. Okay, well, who's here? Who's represented? Are there Taiwanese Americans? Are there Chinese? Are there European American? What's the composition? Who do we need to reach out to? Who do we need to gain support? When we go and advocate on the Hill, sometimes the Congress people get confused and they're like, "Oh, are you all from Taiwan?" And they're like, "No, we're Americans." And so it's important to remind our leaders, our local, our state, our national leaders that this is an American issue. This is not just a Taiwanese issue. That Americans support Taiwan, including Taiwanese Americans, including European Americans, including African Americans. That this issue cuts racial and ethnic boundaries. You can frame it in any number of ways, but I think, right, on the local level, it's important to keep holding awareness events, to talk to students on campuses. That's how I met Tiffany, who is here from Georgetown. We met through a campus event. I gave a talk in Taiwan. You have to try and approach the issue from a number of different ways. Talk to your congresspeople, build relationships. Not all of you are citizens. Not all of you live in DC. I think most of you live in New York, New Jersey. But that doesn't mean you can't write. That doesn't mean you can't build relationships. As I said before, people underestimate how valuable some of those relationships are. If you write to members of Congress, if you establish relationships with people who are staffers, the secret is that Washington staffers here's the shocker, have too much to do and not enough time to do it. And so a lot of foreign policy issues fall through the gaps because they don't have enough time to do the research. So if you send them information, if you say, here's what's going on, this is why it's important to me, if you build that relationship, you become one of their main points of contact, and I swear to God, they will use what you say verbatim sometimes when they are making statements, when they're working on foreign policy issues. They are very happy if they have reliable people feeding them information. So a lot of us think, well, what can I do? I'm just one person, but I cannot tell you how many times that has actually been very, very effective. I mean, my foreign affairs aide for my congressman knows me by name. He always responds when I send him information. I raise issues with him. I mean, and those relationships are meaningful. Obviously, Congress people have many different interests. They're not going to be responsive to everything, but it's very important to raise awareness. Very important to keep people informed. Very important to remind people that Taiwan is important to the United States. It's not just important to the people of Taiwan. And we've discussed a variety of economic, social, political, cultural reasons why we actually share a lot. I lived in Taiwan. I used to jokingly call it the 51st state because there are a lot of shared qualities. I feel a kinship, a connection with the people of Taiwan when I lived there. I think we share a lot more than we don't in a lot of regards.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So I know we really have a very fruitful, the whole discussion. Just response to the question from Alex. We are part of YPG, Young Professional Group of PAPA. So we've been doing a lot of local advocacy. So like this, the postcard you see like this from our Boston chapters. So basically, PAPA YPG has chapters everywhere around the states. So you just print this, and that's the information about Taiwan. So we just do like outreach events at Union Square, at Harvard Square, like hand this bookmark, talk to the strangers. This is a way. Everybody can contribute in certain degree. You don't have to talk like this. Very like an expert. You can talk just about Taiwan. This like basic Taiwan is a country, blah blah blah. Simple things. So I hope you guys get a little information, more knowledge about how to talk to different people, not only to the Hill, but also to your friends, your professor. A lot of you are studying here. Talk to your professor, let them know about Taiwan. Maybe some days when the issue really comes out, you have them to speak some words to Taiwan, and then you'll make a huge impact on Taiwan.
And framing is really important.
Yeah.
You want to be really careful about how you frame these issues. That's why you should always have data or articles. You want to be passionate, but at the same time, you don't want to sound like a ranting lunatic. So it's always, it's walking that fine line between showing your passion, showing why this issue is important to you, and either exaggerating or misconstruing information. You want to make sure that the information you present is very clear, logical, backed up by evidence. You can always say, if you're interested in this, I got a lot of sources for you. You want to establish reliability. And so but what Alyssa is saying is exactly on target.
Yeah, and also, can you raise your hand if you have ever attended YPG conference in this room? Okay, so there are actually a lot of people, and we did go on the Hill to talk to the Congress members or like the staffers. So also these people who just raised their hand, they actually went through all the process of making appointment to talk, and even not only on the Hill but in the district office.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe talk to these people and get some knowledge and skills, and maybe we can have local workshop to talk about how to really make this connection to the Hill or to make the change on the policy makers. But what we say is you don't have to be a big person or an expert to help Taiwan or generate awareness. Like we have a lot of graphic designers there, and maybe you can make good design, for Taiwan, for Keep Taiwan Free, for whatever things. And join Keep Taiwan Free rally could be one way, and think about anything. If it could be creative, it could be artistic, it could be anywhere effective. And sorry, another question. How many of you are overseas students? Like you came from Taiwan, study here? Can you raise your hand? Yeah, a lot of us. So even we are not U.S. citizens, but we can still generate awareness to the U.S. society and the talk to your friends, generate public awareness. Like my friends. Okay. Okay, so Michael. Okay, my friend Michael. Like he printed a lot of Keep Talking Free T-shirt to his friends, and his friend happened to work for New York Times. That makes some impact. So we can kind of briefing about Taiwan issues all the time. Anyway, so that's not the case, but every one of you are very important as an engineer, as a whoever, graphic designer, artist. And if you are really into like politics and want to make some voice here in the States, you can also talk to Liu Wen and Xin Hui. Now we are trying to kind of generate awareness as a Taiwanese student or activist, young activist here in the States. I think our voice should be heard. As a non-citizen, but we still can do a lot of things to generate this Taiwan movement or independence movement here. So talk to Liu Wen when you have time later on, and talk to those people who've been involved in YPG. I think